Police oversight.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager. My name is Farrah Muscadin. I'm the police monitor. Today, we will be going over some of the preliminary oversight analysis that I've done since the last time we met. The presentation would consist of going over some of the strengths and weaknesses of the various oversight models, the comparative analysis of how we stand with other cities across the country, recommendations for cities for us to further review, introducing you to the Police Oversight Advisory Working Group, and our proposed timeline. By way of background, in March, City Council passed a resolution directing the city manager to look into evidence-based best practices in police oversight and to consult with various stakeholders, which we have done. And then on May 22nd, I came before you and gave you a brief update about my conversations with various oversight directors and just an overview of the various models as defined by the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And since that time, I've continued to do the research and the comparative analysis, and I'm here today to give you an update on that. Again, just as a review, the auditor-monitor model, with the auditor model, it reviews the completeness and thoroughness of internal affairs investigations. And the monitor model literally monitors the internal affairs investigations from beginning to end. In this particular model, they still review the broad patterns of investigations, findings, and discipline. And just to point out just a few strengths and weaknesses of this particular model, the auditor-monitor model is more effective in long-term systemic change in the police department. They generally have more robust reporting. And then on a weakness, there tends to be some skepticism because they are generally staffed with full-time paid staff. And it is very dependent on the quality of the staff that is hired to in that particular oversight agency. And then in the investigative model, this is where civilians investigate allegations of police misconduct. Some strengths include it tends to be the most independent form of oversight. It may reduce bias in investigations. And on a weakness standpoint, it is the more complex and more expensive form of oversight. And there does tend to be, from my conversations I've had with directors that oversee this particular model, some resistance from police personnel when dealing with civilian investigators. And then we have the review focus model. And again, this is where civilians review the quality of the internal affairs investigations. This is done obviously at the end when the investigation is complete, and they generally recommend the findings and whether or not they should be exonerated, sustained, and so forth. Some strengths include this ensures community input, obviously because you have volunteers that serve on the panel or board. It is the least expensive form of oversight. And some weaknesses are it can tend to be less independent, and their scope is very limited in terms of what they review. On this chart, you will see to the left of where you see Austin OPM is a chart that was created by NACOL in their publication on the strengths and weaknesses of oversight. And you will see it talks about various components of oversight and as it relates to the various models, and then we compare that to where we stand. This is slide 7 in the presentation. And you will see that majority of them, like as we do, we receive community complaints. In some areas that I want to point out to you in this chart is deciding how a complaint is handled. Currently, we don't really make the decision on how it's handled, and in other models that is done by the director and the staff. Recommends findings on investigations. We don't currently have a formal process. We have input with the police department on that, but in other models you will see that they directly make recommendations on findings on investigations. And then what you should have before you the PowerPoint presentation and the report. The report is longer and a little bit more detailed, and you will see the comparative analysis on page, I believe, 16, 17, and 18. This particular slide in the presentation is just a brief glimpse of those pages. I wanted to just highlight a bigger picture for you in this presentation from those particular pages. But for example, we took the areas that are not currently within the scope of our OPM right now and compared them against the various models. And just to highlight for a few. So for example, we currently do not accept anonymous complaints, but you could see that in the other models it's either frequently or sometimes that they do. In terms of the chief of police being required to respond to recommendations, currently that's not a requirement, but you will see in the other models it's either sometimes or frequently. Decides how a complaint is filed. For us, that is not currently in our scope, but you will see in the other models that is frequently and or rarely in the review-focused model. Next, I want to just go over briefly the 6 cities I'm recommending for us to review, and just to explain a little bit why I'm recommending these cities. Some of it is based on demographics, as you can see, based on median income, population, the size of their sworn officers are very similar to Austin. San Jose is the model. They have an auditor-monitor model. It's more auditor-focused. And I think they could provide a lot of insight to us in terms of their scope from an audit perspective. Our model was based on that about 18, 20 years ago. San Jose is one of the cities that the city visited in around 2000. And they are going through a transformation in terms of looking more broadly at the police department and what processes and policies that is implemented and making recommendations to the police department and to their city council. San Francisco has an investigative model. It is one of the oldest investigative models, and recently their residents in San Francisco passed by referendum by 80% expanding their scope. So now they're going to be able to audit use of force and also policies in the police department. They also have the national model for mediation, and we know from research that mediation is very effective as it relates to police oversight. So I believe a lot of information that they can share with us in terms of the scope in their investigative model as well as in their mediation program. Denver, I mentioned this in my presentation in May, is most similar to us, and the reason why I'm recommending Denver is they oversee not only the police department but also the sheriff's department, and they have a broader scope. They have a staff of 15, and their staffs are divided up by the monitoring team, the policy team, and the community engagement team. And I think that we can learn a lot from their scope and how they conduct their processes with oversight. Minneapolis. Minneapolis is very similar in that I want to say in 2012, they had a traditional investigative model, and it wasn't working for their community. So they put together a task force, and they worked over a year to reevaluate and reassess their plan. And they still have an investigative model, but what they expanded to is they have more policy focus. They revamped their citizen panel. Their citizen panel is involved in all of their investigations, and there are just insights that I think would be very helpful as we formulate it. And they have gone through the same process that we're going through now. And then Seattle. Seattle I'm recommending because it is completely different in their processes. Their new oversight structure is about a year old, and it involves a civilian overseeing their internal affairs. They also created a new inspector general position that will handle more of an audit function, but again, there are insights there that they can share with us in regards to their scope of their service, how they went through their process of reevaluating their oversight, and how it's working. The next slide is a comparison of where we stand with the cities that I'm recommending, and you will see that the majority of them are created by charter and ordinance, and generally the charter is the broad scope of giving the authority for the oversight, and the ordinance talks more specifically about what the oversight will entail. There's also components about whether or not they have subpoena power, if they have a civilian board, and the civilian boards operate very differently. Some are just advisory in nature that deal with just policy. Some have the ability to hire or fire the police chief. For example, that is the case in San Francisco. That police commission has the ability to hire or fire not only the police chief but also the oversight director. And then there are others that involve more on policy, of making policy recommendations to the police department. And then on the far right, you will see the investigation time frame. For example, here we have 180 days. In California, they have basically a year. And in New Orleans, they have 60 days, but can have the ability to request an additional 60 days. So in total, they have 120 days to complete their investigations. The city manager created the Police Oversight Advisory Working Group, and we discussed this a little bit at my last presentation about the scope of community involvement. And how this group came about is primarily through the resolution that was passed in March. There were specific organizations that were named in the resolution, and we reached out to them to serve on this working group, and recommendations from other community leaders. And I've spoken to a lot of directors across the country, particularly the ones that have gone through this process of reevaluating their oversight, and they made some recommendations about groups that we would want to reach out to serve on this. We want it big enough to have a wide range of opinions and perspectives, but small enough because the expectation is that this group is going to roll up their sleeves, really work to come up with recommendations to bring to council and the city manager for review and potential approval. We had our first meeting with the working group last Thursday. It was a very good meeting. We discussed what success looks like from the various perspectives of the working group members. And we have a pretty tight schedule. We're going to be doing video conferencing with the various cities that have recommended. They're all going to be held all in City Hall. They're going to be open for those who are available to attend. And we're also going to record them so that they can be reviewed at a later time. This proposed timeline includes coming back to you in October with those recommendations from the working group. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And again, I just want to say this is just a high-level review of the report. The report goes in much more detail, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have now or later about the report.
First, congratulations on the removal of interim.
Oh, thank you.
I noticed that you had 3 different models. One was the review-focused model, but none of the cities did a review-focused. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason that wasn't
the reason why I didn't recommend a review focus? It's less than what we currently have, and the other cities that I recommended have a civilian board that's part of their structure, and so we'll still be able to get feedback about how their civilian boards operate. But with the review focused, I just didn't think that we necessarily needed to review those cities because it is less oversight than our current structure.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Poole and Councilmember Alter.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm really pleased that you're our official police monitor. You were at the Audit and Finance Committee meeting yesterday,
yes.
And we were talking about communications and the communication flow and reporting back and closing the communications loop and everything. Mm-hmm. Did you have any takeaways from that discussion yesterday that might inform some of the work going forward on a role the police monitor might play within that comms loop?
Yeah, so I did make a note because I think it's going to be important. I'm developing a list of questions that we're going to ask the directors of the 6 cities, and obviously we'll have input of questions from the working group. But I think it's important for the group to hear how that process is done in other cities as well. I agreed with everything that Council said yesterday in terms of the communication, the transparency. In our first meeting with the working group, transparency was repeated several times when we talked about what the success looked like, and that is a piece of the transparency that I think we can address and do a better job at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Councilmember Alder.
Thank you. Congratulations as well. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the next steps. Mm-hmm. So those video conference meetings, is it just the working group that's meeting? Are those public? How is that working?
Mm-hmm. So with the With the video conference, they're going to be held in City Hall. They are open. Anyone can attend those meetings. What the plan is I've developed just a few questions for the directors, but I want the working group to provide some input and help me develop more questions. And what I'd like to do is send them to the directors ahead of time so that they're be prepared to have this discussion. We are allotting about an hour and 15 minutes for each session. But they are definitely opened, and we schedule them over the lunch hour to hopefully get a bigger attendance from our working group so that they're able to attend.
Okay. I think it's great that we have that opportunity. There are a lot of sensitive issues, and there may be insights that they have that they want to share with you that they may be more comfortable not doing on a video, and so I hope you will also have some opportunity to speak with them individually beyond those sessions, which I think is great that we're having, but just in terms of the dynamics and things that are involved here, I think that might be useful to have those additional
Yeah, I have.
settings.
They've been a great resource to me. I've kept in contact with pretty much all of them, and particularly these 6. I'm actually meeting with I've forgotten Andrew Meinberg. He's the director of the Department of Police Accountability in Seattle, and I'll be meeting with his staff on Friday, which I think will be very helpful, and I'll be able to relate what I've learned to the working group.
Great.
But yeah, they've been a great resource.
And when you do have the times for the meetings that you don't have on here, if you could make sure that, I'm assuming others would want to know, but I know that my office would definitely want to know when those meetings are so that we can participate in observing them or learning through
Absolutely.
that process together
I
with
do
you.
have the times, but I'm happy to send them to you.
Okay, wonderful. And then, I don't know if this is a question for you or for the Labor Relations Office, but how are we seeing this overlapping with the negotiations or the contract over the summer?
So I think as it is parallel. They're going to continue negotiations as we continue this path of, developing our oversight recommendations. And as we get closer to those recommendations, we're also going to be working with legal to do their legal analysis. But as it relates to oversight, I anticipate what we have in November, that the topic specific to oversight will be negotiated at that point.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it was interesting to see that some of this oversight is in folks' charters, and I know those are not Texas cities, so they're not governed by the same state laws. Is that something that we're exploring at all, if there's mechanisms that would need to go through our charter? It's not something I've heard through this process. Would that be an avenue that would leverage additional options for us, or does the state law would trump that as well?
It's a legal question. I can take a stab at it, or Ann.
So the charter issue is, I think some of the things that you might want to put in the charter, we couldn't because of state law. State law would preempt us. That's why
Okay.
they've been negotiated in the contract in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ellen?
So I just want to understand the, I guess, more details about the timeline.
Okay.
And if this isn't the appropriate venue, you can let me know. But I'm worried about the police negotiations kind of going on in a parallel track, but us not having information, really, I guess, more detailed information about the oversight until November. I mean, I'm hopeful that we will have a contract as soon as possible, and I want to do what I can as from the council side to facilitate those successful negotiations. And it doesn't seem like waiting till November. It seems like we're setting ourselves up for the possibility that we're going to get new information in November that might prolong the negotiations. So I'm just a little confused about how these timelines are going to coexist.
Morning, Council. Ray Ariano, Assistant City Manager, and certainly keeping track of this whole process. I would say that the timeline that's been laid out here is certainly one that balances the need to have a comprehensive and stakeholder input in terms of outreach and so forth, but also recognizes the impact, potential impact it has on negotiations. So to the degree that we have a great process that includes the stakeholder process, that we can be informed about what is the best fit in terms of oversight for our city, that it includes both stakeholder input from the community as well as the department and the association, will help inform to what degree we can get to that place where we can negotiate. I think certainly what they've done is to try to make sure that they combine a number of the meetings so that they can get through the process of getting through the cities. In fact, I think they started out at one interview a day, one meeting a day, and have collapsed it and combined it into 2 per day so that they can get through the process more quickly. So we're very mindful of the implications of everything that's swirling around in terms of the negotiation and identifying what's the best fit for us as for police oversight.
Okay, and looking at this timeline, is it possible? I guess I'll just say that my preference where it says presentation to City Council would be earlier rather than later, the October 16th, and I'm kind of wondering if the timeline between August 31st and October 16th, if there was an opportunity to condense that a little bit. I think that you're doing really important work, and I want to make sure that we do a thorough job and have all the information that we need. So I don't want to rush through anything, but at the same time, it's just the reality of this situation is that we have some contract negotiations going on, and I want to make sure that we are providing information as soon as possible. So do you feel like you need basically that month and a half, September and October, to do community outreach and work group meeting, or do you think there's a possibility that could be completed
So
earlier?
let me just explain. So we set out the month of September to do community outreach to get input on the recommendations. And the September 27th meeting would be as those recommendations come back, for the work group to discuss those and potentially update, edit, and incorporate that feedback into the recommendations that would then be presented to council and the city manager. There's probably room to condense it. So far, we've been on task. We've been given 90 days to do this, and we're literally at our 90th day. And I impressed upon the working group is that, time is of the essence, and we really need to kind of roll up our sleeves and really, do this as quick as we can, but also as thorough as we can. So there is some wiggle room here. It really is going to kind of depend on the ebb and flow, but I think we will either meet this deadline, or it is possible that it could be sooner.
Okay, and I'll just say that speaking for myself, that would be my preference, and I know that's the I guess continued feedback that I'm getting from my district is that we want to make sure that we get to a place that works for everybody, but that we can provide a contract for our police officers, and I think this is an important part of it. So the sooner the better.
Okay, yes, Mr. Flanagan.
I just want to concur with what Councilmember Troxler said. Faster is better. And as we've all experienced, if we publish a timeline that says November, it probably won't happen until January, February. So I'd much rather shoot for a faster timeline and miss it than to set a long timeline and miss it. So just wanted to put my thoughts on that.
Okay, we're good here. Thank you very much. Greg.
I just want to chime in and say that I just like in the last presentation, I just continue to be impressed by how thorough and detailed, but also clear this work is. In a lot of time thinking about this before this year, I had never seen it laid out in such a way that could really explain the different models. And I think that while I know everybody wants to get to an end point on this, I think so far it just looks really strong. And I wouldn't want to rush it or drag it out, but it seems so far to me it really seems like y'all are breaking this down sort of above and beyond expectations. So I appreciate that. I know y'all and folks in the department are doing work, and all your staff behind the scenes. Just wanted to give a shout out there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, let's do